Welcome to the podcast Psychedelic Awakening, brought to you by Psilogen Biotech, where nature meets precision science.
Hello again and welcome back to the podcast. Sean Dexter here, co-founder of Psilogen, along with our other co-founder, Ryan Maione. And we're going to be talking to you today really about, why we're doing this podcast and ultimately a little bit about Psilogen as well and how we are playing a role in moving psychedelics along the path for treatment within the Canadian healthcare system. So let's talk a little bit about the podcast itself first. And, the purpose here in us having these conversations with you guys is really to raise awareness around the benefits of psilocybin and other psychedelics, both from the general public side and awareness, as well as clinicians, people that are considering this as a path for treatment. So, in having said that, Ryan, tell us, why is psilocybin and why are psychedelics in general in the news every day? Why are we hearing so much about this now?
So the history of psychedelics in the Americas here, Canada and the US primarily, has been a really high tension situation. But there is a really long history of clinical research for psychotherapeutic use, dating as far back to the 40s and definitely pretty prominently through the 60s and 70s. I think that the culture that was created around psychedelics at the time definitely influenced the development of legislation against them, which created a zeitgeist that it was something taboo and maybe shouldn't be talked about in a professional setting. I think that as the growing mental health epidemic rises, we really are seeing a need for new psychotherapeutics. The current programs and drugs are not as effective as we need them to be. And because of that, they're really just opening up a bigger can of worms in general, looking at other medications and other therapeutic options. And psychedelics is a blaring star in that regard. There's, dating all the way back to, like I said, the 60s and 70s, there was a very positive response in psychotherapeutics to these medicines. And then even in the gray and kind of black market area, the underground scene, there's been a lot of development and personal experimentation of just the general population, reporting really, really positive effects for those psychotherapeutic purposes. And so I think that as this epidemic of mental health rises, we need a response. The clinicians specifically need a response to be able to deal with the problems that people are facing. And with the current tools that they have, it's not really possible. So they're looking for other options.
And Ryan, listen, right now, as we see, and every single day, we listen and I look online and we're seeing more and more reports. For example, New Zealand just opened the floodgates for psilocybin there, and they're seeing huge benefits, and they're now decriminalized. Colorado has started pardoning individuals with psilocybin convictions. Where are we at in Canada, and what does it look like today, and where do we think that's going?
You mentioned something really good there in the fact that it all kind of starts in one place, and then as a model gets built, it disseminates out through the world. And so as we've seen Colorado decriminalize and legalize psilocybin, portions of Canada have followed suit. Particularly BC has decriminalized not just psychedelics, but small quantities of drug possession for personal use in general, including psychedelics, which is very important. And this kind of given headway for a model that can be created for their safety and efficacy for other domains throughout Canada. Things do tend to start in other jurisdictions like the United States, and we have been starting to see that over time, like you mentioned, Colorado. There's also a lot of pharmaceutical funding through universities like Johns Hopkins and things for the study of psychotherapeutics. So that's also happening in the United States, and the effects of that kind of very quickly trickle up to Canada and how we use pharmaceuticals here as well.
Yeah, and I think and obviously we have a vested interest in this, and we've been following it for quite some time. But you are seeing it, increasing in volume and in both the quantity and the quality of the research that's coming out, like I haven't seen in my lifetime, and that's really cool to see. So let's talk a bit about Psilogen. And obviously, this is very close to our hearts as we've co-founded Psilogen Biotech. Tell us about the mission and what role you see Psilogen, us, playing in this as psychedelics become more available as a treatment for PTSD, anxiety, addiction, etc. within the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah, so at Psilogen, the real focus is, at the end of the day, is to get low-cost therapeutics to patients. That's really the grand goal. How we're going to do that is really by situating ourselves to provide these clinicians with the tools that they're exploring. So as they continue to explore these new tools, there isn't infrastructure set in place to actually provide them with low-cost, effective medicines. So there's a constant tension between supply and demand as this industry grows, and Psilogen really wants to focus on developing low-cost medicines that are highly effective and highly reputable. Yeah, we're making cutting-edge fermentation models to develop and manufacture psychedelics at scale that are reputable and reliable for these clinicians to use in their practice. Another thing that we really want to explore that's kind of unique is that psilocybin, for example, is not just found in one mushroom, and there are many mushrooms endemic around the world that also contain psilocybin, and people indigenous to those communities have had a history of use for many thousands of years with these mushrooms across the world. And that's something that we want to kind of break free of the current model from, is that only one primary species is cultivated for psychotherapeutic use. But there are many vast species of active mushrooms that could also be used and likely be used to benefit indigenous communities suffering from mental health crises.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think one of the things that's really important to us is being able to bridge that gap between the various programs in Canada, whether it's a special access program or Indigenous communities, and kind of bringing all of those together so that we can find the best path forward, for our development, and certainly for the benefit of the people within those communities. So Ryan, now we talk a little bit about actual therapies that we're seeing clinicians practicing in Canada right now. Tell us a little bit about some of the studies that have gone on and where are we seeing the most significant mental health benefits right now?
So in the United States, I had mentioned Johns Hopkins University had done some research. There have been a number of universities in that vein that have done research primarily with MDMA and psilocybin. Their focus has been on end-of-life comfort and therapy, as well as addictions therapy and behavioral therapies, PTSD, things of those like. Up in Canada, it's primarily MDMA and psilocybin as well being used, and it's also primarily used for addictions therapy. Canada has a much stronger focus on addictions therapy currently than mental health, but that dynamic is slowly shifting. Yeah, and I think really what needs to happen is that the clinicians need to be educated on how these resources can actually be used effectively in their practice, because currently there are not large-scale models for practicing clinicians to use. It's all really just clinical data and research models. And so to scale it out of that is going to take some significant efforts.
Fantastic. Anything that you would add, Ryan, to tell our viewers, this is what you can expect in the future when it comes to psychedelics?
Yeah. Right now it's obviously a burgeoning thing. We're all kind of learning what these are best used for and in what capacity. As that grows, I'll give a little bit of context maybe to how you can access these right now. Currently in Canada, there's something called a special access program in which people with, for example, treatment-resistant depression or something of the sort that have gone through other means to try and treat their situation, they can access psilocybin through the special access program, but it's fairly highly regulated. It's very difficult for people to get in. It's very expensive and incredibly prohibitive in many other ways. As we get more data and more people begin practicing this for different purposes, I think that those regulations are going to slowly dwindle. We're going to slowly see more easy access to this in professional settings. Once Canada creates a model for that, as we've done with cannabis, we're likely to see that extend throughout the rest of the world in, certain jurisdictions that are maybe a little bit more open to it.
And finally, we've had some conversations with clinicians that are practicing within the special access program today. And some of the comments that we've heard as the healthcare community as a whole is often, throughout their lives and their careers, have been, magic mushrooms are one of those things that's a prohibited drug, right? It's something that, that kids took on weekends. And so, there is a resistance to coming on board for some clinicians. What do you say to that? And what do you think we need to do as a company and as a society in order to help overcome some of those prejudgments?
That's a good question. I'm going to need a minute to think about that.
That's okay. Well, take it kind of thing. I know I'm putting you in the spot with something.
No, that is a good question, though, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think really what it boils down to is proving an effective model. A lot of these people, they have a very large amount of responsibility on their shoulders. They're, interacting with people that are in very dire situations, and deviating from something that they're certain is safe and comfortable and understood is a risk, right? And those people exist with a lot of liability in their practice. And that risk is something that's very difficult to overcome. Once effective models are created, and this has been proved out over time, I think just the proof is really in the pudding. If it works, it works. And as we see it continue to work, people will essentially just be forced to adopt it because it's the most effective option.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again on the next podcast.